Hello, Space Mob. Welcome back to another episode of the AST Space Odyssey podcast, episode 5. We're very glad to have you here. Appreciate all the support on the last episode. We had over 30,000 views, which is very exciting, and I just kind of think it speaks on to how the Space Mob's growing, how eyes on this product are growing, and kind of just awareness all around. And I think that's a great thing for this ecosystem. And today's episode, this is one of my favorite. It is going to be a deep dive into the technicals. So someone like me, I've been invested in this for 4 years, and the technicals have always been something that's like, how exactly can we get this everyday smartphone to connect to a satellite that's so far away and have it provide LTE, texting, and calling? It's pretty incredible stuff. But if you're not like a scientist or engineer, when you think about it, you're like, I don't really know how this happens. I understand like some of the basics, but I really wanted to understand a deep dive, and I think it's important information for everybody to know here. And I think grasping this tech as an investor has really just made me more confident, especially comparing it to Starlink and kind of seeing how like two of the biggest direct to cells that are going to be coming out kind of work each, and you can kind of see how AST does kind of excel in the tech here, and very exciting times. So today, with no further ado, we have a special guest. Now let's get him here. Welcome, CatSe. So CatSe, before we even start this, I just want to say thank you, because you have been able to kind of like prove all this FUD wrong that people are saying, oh, AST won't work, AST this, AST that. But with your research and your Twitter posts and kind of like diving into all the technical specifics of this company, I think it really helps just like an average investor kind of really understand this product. So let's just dive right in. Then once again, thank you for coming on. And so to start, I would just like to hear like a little bit about your background.
Hi, thank you for having me on the podcast. It's an honor to be asked by a fellow space mob to present on the matter of AST SpaceMobile. Was asked also to say a bit about myself. I'm a Swedish citizen, 51 years old. Entrepreneur. So I run a business that has a country estate where there's tenants, cattle, forestry, and energy generation and storage. Businesses doing well. Got 3 children, a wife, and there's also a couple of military working dogs in our house. Training, I was trained to be, and I served as platoon commander in a ranger regiment, studied mechanical engineering. Been in politics for 2 decades, and I serve as vice chair of the municipality executive board in a Swedish municipality. As you'll notice, I'm not a native speaker. Studied English in the 90s in our school system here in Sweden, and I very, very rarely use my spoken English, so if some words don't come out right, you'll know why.
Thank you for the intro, CatSe. Quite the background here, and I can really see now where like the mechanical engineering and military experience has brought your interest to ASTS. So now I'm curious, kind of what really got you like first interested in AST, and when was it?
I've been invested in AST since before DSPAC, when it was NPA. Back then I was introduced to the company by reading information on social media by people like Ant-Man Man and the Cook Report, and eventually got in contact with them, and I shared their view that we needed to keep the news feed alive. Back then there weren't much news about the startup company. We needed to contrast those portraying the company's future and prospects in a negative way with our positive view and share our research. So it's been very much on purpose, and it was also a way for me to sort of pay back the information I found when I found the company, and by sharing my findings in the same way. So I've been doing that since back then. I'm going to cover space communications and contrast that with wireless terrestrial networks, the cellular networks of planet Earth, because I think that's a good exercise to first look at the landscape zoomed out and then zoom in later, and contrast AST SpaceMobile to Starlink as the main two concepts. We'll also cover dual use, military use cases at the end. So this will take a while, but I hope it's worth it. To start, we're living in the information age. It's also the space age. Before that was the industrial and agricultural age. So in this time we can make something once and sell it many times, something not tangible. It's part of the digital economy, and there are means of production that are common with the ages before that. The industrial and agricultural age, they had labor, land and capital, and as of late we add data and information as a fourth mean of production. This new aspect has a hyperscale and very fast go-to-market aspect to it, because you can make something once and you can sell it many times. And so big companies of our time that do very well, they are in the communication services sector. Magnificent Seven and such companies, they all have an aspect of this information thing.
Very cool to hear, man. I remember being invested at DSPAC, and like that first pop to like 21 was crazy. It's been such a wild ride, honestly, and I think it's really like important, the contributions of you and Panman, Tut, Cook Report. I just think it's important that we kind of have this community here to just spread info on the company and the tech kind of in one spot. So someone as an average retail investor can really be interested in this company, because there's so much like research that we do. And I think like overall this has been very important to the ecosystem, because we kind of see where this thing's going before institutions and big people. So let's just dive right into the tech. So Space Mob listening, get ready to put your thinking caps on and learn. So CatSe, let's start with comparing space networks to our just typical everyday cell towers and coverage.
Both these networks, they crave users, be they human intelligence or lately artificial intelligence, they all connect to the network. And the networks, they'll crave users, because the value of networks increase with the number of users. So there is this drive or force to expand the network coverage and the number of users from both ends, so to speak. And that driver is universal for both space and terrestrial networks. And the scarce resource that's also common is spectrum. It's a limited, scarce resource. And I have this thesis that spectrum, it will find its way to the most efficient system. And it's interesting to try and analyze what will be the most efficient system. because it will see resources that are scarce allocated to it. So it's an efficiency thing. And it's the market economy that is the power that assures that spectrum finds its way to the most efficient system to meet demand in an efficient manner. And when I look at efficiency, I like to cut that down in three main parts. It's regulatory readiness, it's market readiness, and it's technological readiness. And so to start up with regulatory readiness, for SATCOM companies, the regulatory timing risks are the most severe risks to handle. So you need regulatory readiness, and that you're efficient in that. You also need market readiness, market strategy and go-to-market, and a business model that works and is efficient. And lastly, the technological readiness and efficiency. All three are needed, and an efficient system excels at all three. And we'll talk mostly about here the technological aspects. One thing that increases technological efficiency in one aspect of the go-to-market also is multi-use or dual use. As the efficiency is a ratio between output and input. With dual use you get yet another output for the set input, and so it increases efficiency in a leapwise manner or orthogonal to the first use case. So that's something to look out for, and this dual or multi-use case, and we'll come back to that and focus for the rest of my speak here, the tech talk on tech. So let's talk a bit about space. A lot of value for space companies is in communications and in sensing, and it's because it's hard to pick tangible stuff back down from space because it burns on re-entry. And so our age, the information age, is much defined by this data they can collect and communicate in space. So it's an interesting domain in our age, space. And as for dual use, I'll drop an acronym here already. ISAC, Integrated Sensing and Communications. When you can use this scarce resource spectrum and use it for both sensing and communications, that's interesting 4 letters, and we'll come back to that too. I'll also speak a bit to OODA loops. It's an American Boyd who invented the concept, but it's about the decision making. You observe, you orient, you decide, and you act. That's that acronym. And observe, that's sensing, orient, decide, there's communications in that. So it also speaks to the decision loop. You have that in business and commercial life. You also have it in warfare. So it plugs into that OODA loop. Whoever spins that fastest wins. So But the way we've been doing communications and sensing in space is in a bit in a way of antagonistic way, using proprietary siloed systems, proprietary communications protocol, where you the entire network is proprietary. It connects to proprietary end user devices, and you have proprietary gateways and proprietary satellites that aren't plug and play with other systems, not other systems in space, not other systems terrestrially. So that's a characteristic that's a bit unique to the way space has been doing communications. And I can reflect on this. There isn't a single satellite communications constellation that's been successful without being dual use, being serving both government, military use cases and commercial use cases. There are, of course, constellations that serves only government and defense, but there's not a straight commercial system that's been successful to date. Speaks to this dual use efficiency thing, so again, something to look for. So proprietary and siloed in space, and then we'll look at terrestrial networks. They were also the terrestrial cellular networks. They were also proprietary up until 2G. And 2G was when phones untethered from walls and started to be analog mobile communications. It was disruptive to fixed copper communications. And it's a bit like the disruptive change that's happening in space now when geostationary communications is disrupted by low Earth orbit constellations going at a lower altitude. So, same sort of leapwise disruptive change happened to telecommunications when we got the first cellular phones. They were analog, still proprietary, and so the third generation partnership 3GPP was introduced. They developed standard-based communications, and all these different companies doing cellular communications, they've been collectively invested $1 trillion into the R&D of this common standard. It's no longer an antagonistic proprietary system, it's a mutualistic or symbiotic standards-based system where there are commercial off-the-shelf plug-and-play devices that can interoperate with each other, connect seamlessly to other players in the market. You buy a device from one company and it connects to the network built with tech from other companies. What that brings is a very rapid rate of improvement, economy of scale, and a very big user base. So you get handsets at a much faster pace than, say, with Iridium network. That's a space-based proprietary siloed network. User base expands dramatically, and there's been more disruptive leapwise changes in the terrestrial cellular communications. The rate of that iteration is based on how fast you can pay for the terrestrial equipment and field a new generation of terrestrial equipment. So every 10 years or so we get a new G, 2G, 3G, 4G. 4G brought us digital mobile communication, laid the groundwork and enabled the smartphone. Everyone has a portable computer equipped with sensors these days. Wasn't possible without 4G. And it's a defining gadget in the information age we live in. 4G and 5G terrestrial cellular protocols, they have a much higher spectral efficiency than military equivalents. So the waveforms introduced when 4G and 5G is introduced, they have less throughput of data per sliver of spectrum. It's in large explained by the commercial terrestrial protocol evolving faster than both SATCOM and terrestrial military communications, due to being standards-based, having a much larger user base and much more R&D going into it. This makes the concepts and technology of commercial cellular radio, your cell phone and the way it works, very interesting to the military. As with the increase of artificial intelligence, autonomy, drones, more sensors, these days we have more radios fielded in war than we have soldiers. Used to be the other way around. The need for communications, the need for data throughput is increasing very fast in the defense military domain. And the need to do that to small, lightweight radios over vast distances is increasing fast. The next planned leapwise change in cellular network is interesting. It lies in the future, near future. It's called 6G. In 6G, the terrestrial network, it finds a space component that forms a hybrid vigor network that's terrestrial and non-terrestrial. This is around year 2030. So we have discussed this thesis of space, that's proprietary, and the antithesis of terrestrial. This becomes a synthesis, fusion. The former chairwoman of the FCC, Jessica Rosenworcel, she called this the single network future. So we see the standards-based terrestrial plug-and-play interoperable ecosystem conquering the space domain, applying its philosophy to the fused space and terrestrial multi-domain network. It will be standard-based, it will be interoperable, because that's the way that has been proven most efficient. And so the next leapwise disruptive change in communication is when these two fuse, and it will be as transformative and as defining as 4G and the cell phone was to the way we live and work and interact. 6G will be a leapwise change. The bigger of the two that fuse is the terrestrial network. So it's interesting to understand terrestrial networks, to understand what kind of type of space component that's going to fit most seamlessly into this and be the most fit from a regulatory, technological and market perspective. It's the space component that's augmenting the existing larger terrestrial network, the existing large terrestrial consumer base. It's not the other way around. And so you are likely to arrive at the most efficient integration, thinking hard about how the new space component will fit seamlessly into the larger terrestrial component to enhance it. Without need to upend, remodel it, it needs to be backward compatible. And be plug and play. So what's going to be the winner in this new disruption? What's the future like? All we know for certain is that disruption brings a reallocation of resources. And so being early to understand what lies ahead is also a way to profit on this reallocation of resources, this revaluation of companies. So there's when the disruption happens and people realize it in broad scale, there is this reallocation of financial resources, a reallocation of spectrum. There's no longer space spectrum and terrestrial spectrum, there's just spectrum, and it will find its way to the most efficient system.
Yeah, I think when talking about kind of the use cases and the most efficient system, I think it's kind of important to compare this to Starlink, who the media has pretty much pinned as AST's number one competitor, which is kind of funny because when these articles come out and such, it's like SpaceX's or Starlink's little brother, Starlink competitor, is planned to launch 243. So the media has kind of pinned us, kind of comparing us to them. So yeah, I would just like to hear kind of how the tech stacks up to Starlink's.
So we got Abel and Elon. Both are immigrants living the US and the American dream, starting business. It's a wonderful thing, but they're kind of also a bit different personalities. Abel I'd call the deal maker, and Elon is a bit antagonistic as a person, which is kind of interesting given what I just said about terrestrial and space philosophies. Abel, by the way, he started his career as a young telecom engineer at Ericsson in my home country, Sweden. And these guys and their design teams, they made very different design choices in almost every choice you can make. So it's interesting to contrast them. Very different philosophy. And so AST was started to build this component from first principles. Starlink, they had an existing constellation, existing concept, and they patched the direct-to-cell component onto their existing satellite platform and philosophy. That's the biggest difference, I'd say. AST is planning to launch a low Earth orbit LEO constellation at 700 kilometers altitude. Last ITU filing said 690. Starlink is at very low Earth orbit, which is 350 kilometers, so half the altitude. Those altitudes are quite different. Drag is limiting the dwell time and orbital lifetime in a very low Earth orbit. It doesn't just cut it in half, it's half altitude, it's more than 1 order of 10 base magnitude higher drag down there. And the VLEO satellites, they also have a much smaller footprint. You get close to something, your footprint is smaller. Picture yourself walking towards a wall at night with a flashlight, and the footprint of the flashlight shrinks as you get closer. It's the same with satellite footprint.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense. Thanks for the analogy. It kind of helps the average kind of engineering mind understand that. So I'm wondering why Starlink chooses to go low.
One reason Starlink chooses to go low is they use the 4G LTE protocol. It's a decade old by now. This 4G LTE protocol, it has a short tolerance for latency. Latency is a tech word for delay. And the protocol is built to get an acknowledgement signal from the local tower, message received within a certain time frame. And if you go higher, distance increases, and this will time out. AST has a patented fix for that. They send the OK received before the message is even received, and they can do that because it's scheduled. Starlink, they don't have that patent, so they need to go low. But it comes with a lot of negative trade-offs, and we'll get back to that. But one of them is that the satellite passes over very fast, and the footprint shrinks, so you need more satellites. AST, they can do that patented trick because they do the error checking of the with other methods that are built into the protocol that aren't as sensitive for latency. It's patented and sets them apart. AST is also aiming to do 3 spectrum bands. They are launching the low band tier first. Has better propagation characteristics, longer wavelength, lower frequency. And then they'll do mid-band, and last they'll do C-band tier. So 3 tiers there. They also aim to being able to simultaneously connect to a cell phone to all 3 by multi-connectivity and carrier aggregation. You can be connected on several bands to multiple satellites simultaneously. AST calls it MIMO. Multiple input, multiple output. Starlink, they will do mid-band first, and they already fielded a constellation that operates in mid-band in PCS G block sliver of spectrum. Then they aim to do low-band later. Starlink, they do it in this order because low-band requires larger arrays than mid-band. And they are constrained by the fairing size currently of Falcon 9. AST has developed a patent to beat the fairing size constraints. They have much larger arrays. They unfurl them in space. AST, they have spring-loaded hinges to panels that they simply release in space to form a huge array. This huge array allows them to communicate with high directivity from that higher orbit. The larger the array is, the more focused and narrow the beams will become, and you can focus on smaller cells on Earth. So by having this way of packing a phased array, they can build much larger phased arrays than what Starlink can do. And Starlink, they also plan to do a bit larger arrays with Starship, but they will still be much smaller than AST arrays because they don't unfurl. They have the size that fits in the fairing. So Starlink's approach is larger fairings, whereas AST can make larger arrays anyway. So that's another difference that sets them apart.
Awesome. Thanks for making it kind of easy for me to understand. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about the network architecture between them.
AST is doing something that's called transparent architecture. It means their satellite is a bit dumber. Doesn't do as much processing in space. There is no commercial base station up on their satellite. So it's more like an antenna payload or a reflector up there. Noteworthy being just a dumb reflector in space, having very little commercial processing done up there does not exclude AST from serving as a reflector to a military base station down on Earth or a battle management system with the same phased array. And that military processing can be networked and it can operate on separate end-to-end loop. Such systems can also be on orbit. and it speaks to a dual use case. Also to the regulatory readiness, because for the commercial communications you don't want that connected to anything but base station in that nation state that you serve. It has to do with legal intercept and control of the sensitive data of your citizens. So it's good for regulatory readiness. It also puts equipment down on Earth that's serviceable and accessible. So they can serve two purposes potentially, one over hostile contested theaters and another over another commercial use case over homeland and allied territory in peace, which would result in a higher total utilization and a higher efficiency. In commercial operations, AST just bounces the signal from a terrestrial gateway controlled by the nation state, and they have a Nokia AirScale state-of-the-art 5G base station down on Earth. It's actually single RAN, so it can do 2G, 3G, 4G, 5G, and be forward compatible just by flipping the base station or upgrading it to 6G. Starlink has 4G LTE repurposed swarm technology on board base stations. They put a base station on each satellite. That's called a regenerative architecture. Their satellite uses a bit of power to do on-orbit processing that AST doesn't do. Starlink, of course, they have optical inter-satellite links. So will AST, but Starlink uses them for their commercial service. AST adds them for government use cases. And Starlink has a feeder downlink in K-band, which is 20 to 30 gigahertz range, whereas AST has QV band. Its frequency is 40 to 50 gigahertz. And where AST uses steerable JPL heritage unfurlable dish antennas to do this link, Starlink uses phased arrays. This means that AST has much higher throughput in their feeder link. It's a very wide band, and they can do 10 gigahertz of bandwidth, which is huge. On their feeder link, and they have this dish antenna that has no matter what the scan angle is, because it's a gimbal dish antenna, the gain is the same, and so wide field of view and still high gain. Phased arrays aren't quite like that, but it enables them to have fewer satellites, fewer gateways, and they can operate at a low look angle seen from Earth, or a wide field of view seen from space with our feeder link. Due to this, significantly reducing the number of gateway they need. It speaks to the pace that they can deploy the network worldwide, globally. AST also has something called adaptive beamforming in the service link. So I just spoke about the feeder link. Now we'll talk about the service link. It's the link that connects to the cell phone. They have adaptive beamforming in this link. And here AST, just like Starlink, uses a phased array. Tower networks is what they both try to integrate with and supplement, augment. Towers are, it's called mobile network, but towers are of course not mobile. They're stationary, they're fixed to the Earth, and AST is trying to mimic that by using adaptive beamforming. So even though the low Earth orbit satellites travel fast across the sky, they train their beams onto a fixed spot on Earth, so that the Earth-fixed cells they create do not move along the surface with the satellite. That's AST's way of mimicking or integrating with the terrestrial network that has cells created by the towers that are fixed. So they shine their beams on the green field in between and generate spot beams there in the same spot on Earth, even though the satellites move. Starlink's not like that. They just project beam cells straight down, and then these beam cells they move along the surface of the planet as the satellites move. And very low Earth orbit satellites, again, Starlink is at half the altitude of AST SpaceMobile. They move very fast. This means that connecting to a Starlink cellular array to cell network, you're going to have a lot of beam to beam handovers. And after having a lot of rapid beam to beam handovers, then comes the satellite to satellite handover, and again rapid beam to beam handovers. And each beam has a new cell ID. And so you're going to flip through new cell IDs every second or so. And the cellular protocol wasn't really built for that. It's a bit like going on a hypersonic missile connecting to towers. The system was never built to handle such rapid and so many handovers, and the phones aren't used to changing cell IDs all the time. Every time they lose the cell ID they're connected to, they are going to scream for a new cell on full power, and it's also something that drains batteries, and it can cause lost text.
Well, CatSe, what a great comparison of the technicals. It really helps someone like me who understands the business sides of both really get to know how each technically works. I would say that draining batteries and lost text are definitely kind of the most hurtful thing to direct to cell. Because when you look at direct to cell, it's kind of supposed to be the most reliable source. So you have service anywhere in the world as long as the satellites cover there. So I think reliability is very, very key here. And that's why the service even exists. I was wondering if you could kind of speak on why ASTS or AST excels in the space.
Whereas an AST satellite when it comes 20 degrees above the horizon, it will fix a spot beam on you or the area you're in, and as long as it's in the sky until it approaches the horizon on the other side, it will train that same spot beam onto you, the same cell idea. And the phone will be used to that and built for that, because that won't be any more rapid than, say, going by car and pass rural towers. Then you also shift cell IDs and do handovers, but not every other second, but there will be 4 or 5 minutes between the beam to beam handovers. And it really is when there's a new satellite that comes into view that there's an handover. As long as you're under one satellite, you stay in the same cell ID. So big difference between the two architectures, where one is better at mimicking the terrestrial system. It's also that signal strength varies within a beam. So when the beam passes over the Starlink system, you will have a bit stronger signal, a bit weaker, a bit stronger, a bit weaker, a bit stronger, a bit weaker, and as it's at its weakest, all these handovers. And that speaks to a struggle to keep a stable connection. And it's not the only struggle that Starlink has to keep a stable connection. The beamforming of AST is pretty advanced. You'll find it in radar systems, not so much in communication systems. Because to form an exact circular equal-sized footprint on Earth, even though the satellite is at different distances and different angles, it requires that when you have a low look angle, it's just above the horizon, then you have a very directed beam with an oval cross-section to project a circular beam cell on a slant surface of the Earth. When it's straight above you, you'll have the widest beam, and the circular cross-section of that beam will create, as it's perpendicular now, a same size beam cell that's circular. And to do this is pretty advanced beamformer, considering each satellite creates in excess of 2,000 beam cells and it's moving. But AST has this technology, they have that set, and they developed a lot of their technology in a reverse test. They started some years ago by launching a satellite with a cell phone in it to space. They recreated the space environment down on Earth in a radome, which had a climate chamber to it. It still stands in Midland. And then they could get hands-on with an advanced phased array. This one, the first one, was 4.5 meters in diameter. So their first initial test bed, even though they didn't launch it into space, was bigger than the current Starlink satellites launched into space. And they got hands-on time with that to tinker with it and perfect their technology in a very fast iteration, thanks to this reverse way of doing it. It's a very smart way of doing it. And they got to perfect the technology before they launched their first test satellite with a phased array into space, which was BlueWalker 3. BlueWalker 3 has been a complete mission success. They've tested every system and it has worked as intended. It is still in orbit and it creates smaller spot beams than what Starlink do, and it creates them on better spectrum, better propagation spectrum, and it does it from a higher orbit where it's a wider field of view and longer dwell times. If we compare mid-beam to mid-beam, apples to apples, I said before that AST starts with low beam and then mid-beam. Starlink starts with mid-beam, then low beam. But if we compare the same frequency range, then it's Starlink at 50 km of diameter cells and AST Block 3 BlueBirds doing mid-band will have 24 km diameter cells. And if we compare area, that was diameter, the Starlink beam cells is 4 times larger. What that means is that a number of users in that cell, 4 times the number of users will have to share the same spectrum on Starlink compared to AST system. So small beam cell is good, and AST has smaller beams. It speaks to spectrum reuse. And the repurposed one technology and the RF technology is developed much faster and in a bit of a haste with Starlink direct to cell. SpaceX are developing things fast, so they will of course improve. But current state of affairs, the AST Tech is 4 times more efficient. Another thing is ACLR. It's adjacent channel leakage ratio, and this is about how much radio frequency energy you spill in adjacent channels. ACLR of Starlink is 20 decibels. AST's equivalent is 45 decibel on a logarithmic scale, which means that AST is in excess of 2 orders of 10 base magnitude better at not spamming out-of-band interference into adjacent bands. This means that AST can operate closer to borders, closer to where cell towers are, that they don't create a lot of self-interference, because these cells, what you do is you use adjacent channels of your own in adjacent cells. And if you have a bad RF technology, amplifiers and such, like Starlink does, then they will spill energy into the adjacent cells on adjacent channels, which is what they are themselves using in these cells. So they are going to degrade their own system, not just the system of others, because they have RF technology that is subpar, that is worse than that terrestrial systems use, whereas AST is better or on par with the type of technology used in terrestrial systems. The regulator in USA, the FCC, that they forced some. Initially, they forced Starlink to lower their power because of this, and it remains to see what regulators abroad will do.
Wow, that's very fascinating stuff. I do think it's very important for the service to be as close to a regular phone service as possible, versus for user experience and ease, so it's not hopping in and off the network, unreliable. That can just create a mess, because that's not what the service should be like. So can you talk about the Starlink replenish rate? I've seen that this could impact finances and space debris, because it seems like to me they're just launching tons and tons of satellites, just trying to take over any aspect of space they can.
If you launch many satellites, which you have to do when they have a small field of view, a small footprint in very low Earth orbit, then you're going to find that replenish rate of many satellites with a short dwell time due to drag, that's much worse. You need to deploy and redeploy a lot of capital, a lot of payload into space this way, and it's worse for the economy of the company and efficiency than if you launch a few satellites into low Earth orbit, twice the altitude, where AST aims to go. The drag is so low that it's not a drag that's limiting the orbital lifetime at 700 kilometers. It's other aspects, degradation of batteries and stuff. So AST, they do propulsive deorbiting. They have other means also. They have a high drag mode in, say, 10 years of lifetime. And they put new satellites up there when they want to and when they have better technology to deploy. more efficient satellites. Technology evolves in a decade. Starlink satellites, they are in very low Earth orbit, 350 kilometers. Drag is orders of magnitudes higher there, and they're going to run out of fuel and deorbit within a few years, about 3 years at 350 kilometers. Atmospherical events might cut that down to 2 years. You need to replenish a very large number of satellites, considering they have larger constellation and shorter dwell time, just to keep that constellation going. And it speaks to the economy of the constellation. When you get much less value output in the form of area spectral efficiency, and you have to launch much more payload into space. And so AST has not only smaller cells, it also has a higher spectral efficiency. Spectral efficiency is how much data can you put through a certain bandwidth, a certain sliver of spectrum. And they've been doing 4 bits per hertz, which is really good. And we know also that they beat the ITU expectations of this non-terrestrial network that said that, because this figure of 4 bits per hertz, that's for downlink, and ITU in their studies, they thought, well, the uplink will be 1/10 of that. It's not. It's much better in AST's case that they are at 2 bits per hertz in the uplink, which means they can send half the amount of data that they can receive to a cell phone. That's really good. All SATCOM is asymmetrical in this aspect, but so is the communications to cell phone. You do more of streaming and download than you do upload, and having this ratio of 4 to 2 bits per hertz means that it's not the uplink that's limiting to the system, which was what was expected. But they have really good RF technology, and they've achieved 2 bits per hertz. Starlink is closer to 1 bits per hertz because their array is smaller and have fewer antenna elements, which means signal to noise ratio is worse. And so if you combine these two, the spectral efficiency with the smaller cells, a higher spectral efficiency with a smaller cell in the AST's case, you get some 16 times better area spectral efficiency. So that's above the denominator. That speaks to the output. And what I said before about deploying a lot of capital and payload, that speaks to the required input, and the efficiency of this design choices all speak in favor of AST when compared to Starlink. And of course it also speaks to the quality of service for the user. Remember, all these lost calls on the handovers also speaks in AST's favor.
It's very refreshing to kind of hear how AST seems to be a bit more built for direct-to-cell versus it seems like Starlink kind of is rushing up to catch up with direct-to-cell with the satellites that are already launched that aren't necessarily built for this. More built for like the satellite with Wi-Fi, with the little pad that people buy with the app. So I think the tech really does favor AST, and I believe that's kind of why we have seen almost all these giant MNOs signing here versus like the only really big notable one for Starlink is T-Mobile. And I honestly think this could backfire on T-Mobile eventually once they see Verizon and AT&T having this reliable service everywhere with high-speed internet. And then Starlink's is still just kind of choppy, not reliable, killing batteries and stuff like that. So with a lot of these like use cases and things we've been seeing lately, we've been hearing a lot about the Golden Dome. And I know so far, like Elon hasn't said he's bidding on it so far, at least public as we know. I wouldn't really be surprised if that changes with his ties to the government. But I'm wondering, like, why do you think AST would be more suitable for the Golden Dome project here?
Of interest to the Golden Dome missile defense initiative launched by the current US administration and proliferated warfighter space architecture of the SDA. Both of these are in low Earth orbit, where AST is launching their constellation. AST satellites are big, yet pretty agile. They have a high-low drag configuration, they have Hall-effect ion thrusters, so they have power, and this way of reducing speed fast with a high drag configuration. They also have in low drag configuration the edge of the ray towards incoming debris. Speaks to orbital debris mitigation, but also to how easy it is for an adversary to affect them in a negative way. Power aperture, that's the product of the onboard power and the size of the antenna. And on that metric, there's nothing like AST's platform out there. The alternative type of array can take NISAR launching before AST from India, launching in June, scheduled in June at least. That array, single satellite, cost 1.5 billion. It has big reflector that's a bit like a huge umbrella. They use force generated in space to force deployment on a very flimsy structure, 12-meter diameter big umbrella made of mesh and struts and wires. They are very prone to fail on deployment, so that's the alternative to generate highly directive beams from space. AST has a solution that's not prone to fail on deployment, that's much more predictable, and that not only beats the fairing constraint that's holding back Starlink, it also can be larger than these giant umbrellas.
That's very cool, and I can visualize kind of how these giant satellites will be very beneficial to Golden Dome with detecting, with all those technicals. So it seems like we're well suited for this program. We'll kind of see how it unfolds. There's no really definite if we'll get it or like the timeline on this, but it really seems like the use cases for AST are just piling up at this point. Could you please kind of go into some of these use cases, and I'd love to hear some of the technicals behind them.
IoT is one that's also commercial. The Internet of Things, small devices that are connected on low bandwidth connections, tracking cargo and distributed sensors. There is also the Internet of Warfighting Things, distributed sensors with small size, weight and power have a big military use. Like I said before, we're in an age where there's more radios deployed in the battlefield than there are soldiers. and they're distributed, a lot of them with size, weight and power constraints. And we'll see more of that with drones and so on. So that's a huge market, a 1 trillion addressable market just for the commercial use case. And again, there's a military equivalent. Then we have fused LEO positioning, navigation and timing. And are these real? Well, we know that IoT use case is addressed by AST. It's in their investor presentations and so on. And so that's being addressed. It's interesting also because you can address the IoT use case before having a continuous coverage. It's not so critical to have always on connectivity. Tracking cargo, you can do that every 15 minutes, just as good as every second. Fused LEO positioning, navigation and timing, it's more jamming, spoofing, resistant and more precise alternative to GPS. GPS is in medium Earth orbit between GEO and LEO, and positioning satellites, and they are not very directive, so it's a very, very weak signal compared to what a LEO system can do, and certainly so equipped with AST's huge phased arrays, which is a very directive antenna. So it's something the government looks to deploy. And we have this prime contractor that AST is working with called Fairwinds, and they say AST has this capability. AST themselves say they are developing in this, and the government is very interesting to have alternatives to GPS because it's being jammed by adversaries and has huge economic and military value. Precision of precision weapons comes in large extent from positioning. And so this is being addressed by the company. Remains to see with which priority and if it will be a winning system in this aspect. Others also try to do LEO. GPS alternatives. Optical intersatellite links are being added. We know this also from a Fairwinds contract. That will add precise ranging between the satellites, as does possibly the QV links used for gateways. You need to have precise control of where the satellites are in order to deliver positioning down to Earth. You also need other aspects. One of these is precise control of time. That's also needed to do 5G, and we know that AST, unlike Starlink, has closed the loop on the 5G protocol, which is much more sensitive to that aspect of keeping a schedule of precise time. So we know they can do that already. Positioning requires even more precise time. So, but it's a potential dual use case. They'll benefit from precise timing in their base communications case, and it won't steal much of the capacity of the system, because in 6G a lot of different mechanism for improved positioning is included in the protocol, and the positioning signal is fused with a communication signal. It's not a separate signal. So it's in the standard-based 6G protocol that AST aims to serve. There's already this positioning that uses terrestrial network and non-terrestrial network to provide positioning. So we'll expect to see that in some sort of fashion. Remains to see if it will be the best LEO positioning or just some basic 6G positioning. Then there's multi-connectivity, MIMO. I spoke to that before, but as AST launches multiple LEO tiers, one low band with 48 kilometer wide beam cells, one mid-band tier from 1.4 gigahertz to 2.4 gigahertz. That's 24 kilometer wide beam cells, and lastly the C-band tier, which is just 12 kilometer wide cells. They aim to be able to connect a cell phone to all three of these tiers simultaneously, and so that will make quality of service much more even, because one or two of these satellites most likely in a good spot to have a good link, so much more even aggregated level of connectivity, but also when you aggregate all these three links, much wider bandwidth, and so true broadband to many users is enabled by this multi-connectivity. We have 6G waveforms. I dropped the four-letter acronym early in this speak, which is ISAC, Integrated Sensing and Communications. One way to do that is OTFS, and we know AST is collaborating with Cohere on this type of waveform. It's doing radio the way radar is doing radio, so not in the time frequency domain, where delay in the form of latency and frequency shift in the form of Doppler causes noise and degrades. They flip that around, and they're doing radio in the latency and in the Doppler domain by some smart math. That increases dramatically the throughput, and it enables joint communication and sensing, also known as that four-letter acronym ISAC, Integrated Sensing and Communications. So with the same set of spectrum, you can do both radar type of sensing and also use it for communications. They aren't mutually exclusive. You can do both. That's unlocking instead of having a dichotomy or antagonistic between, are we going to use this spectrum for defense, or are we going to use this for commercial connectivity? Are we going to do this to protect our nation and way of life, or are we going to use it to make money and a better life? You can do both. It's very attractive to a regulator to be able to unleash that spectrum for both these use cases, and 6G waveforms, the way AST is experimenting with, enables this. So it's a very important aspect of how they can do things in the near future. You need to continue to innovate and be at the forefront of development in order to be attractive. these mobile network operators, government agencies that want to work with AST, they look at this technology roadmap. And I also do that as an investor to see that they are not just building their current models at a fast pace, but they are also developing the next model. They have AST, that is advanced side lobe mitigation through weighting, also known as tapering. That's patented also. And what they do is, when they use a certain portion of the array to generate a beam, then they taper the power to the antenna elements. Picture a normal distribution or a bivariate normal distribution, and in layman terms, just a heap of gravel will form a bivariate normal distribution. It will have the highest density in the middle, and then that will taper off to the edge where the density is the smallest. They taper the power on the section of the array they use to create a certain beam in that way, so that the antenna elements that are near the center uses the highest power. What they get with that is the same type of directivity, but smaller side lobes. Side lobes are like unwanted side beams that they can reduce radically through this concept of tapering. It's also technology used in radar, and they have this integrated in their system and patented for the communications use case. They also use null steering and can so be jam spoof resilient. That means that they don't, this side lobe mitigation means they don't spam unwanted radio frequency energy into, say, a tower cell site or an adjacent country or into their own adjacent beam cells. They focus their energy where it's needed. Good energy where it's needed, no bad energy where it's not unwanted. So advanced control not just over the beams, but also the side lobes. And we'll talk a bit about intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance for a while. There's this OODA loop, I think I mentioned it. Starts with observing things. Understanding comes with the next orient phase. Then you decide and then you act. AST technology speaks to all four of these phases in the decision-making loop, including the act part of it, because you cannot just be jam spoofing resilient. You can also use such an array to jam and spoof, which is in the act phase. But intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, it speaks to the early parts of the OODA loop, and you can use a phased array for that. One is mapping and tapping. You can pick up cellular signals and that of other radios, and you can map where they are, and you can tap into that communication. You can use something called time differentiation of arrival, and have two sats and very precise through triangulation, multiangulation, understand where a radio is, not just in that cell, but with meter level precision understand where is that radio and map that it has business intelligence value to know where are radios, where is the demand for ground or terrestrial based communications, to know where is the next most profitable tower to build, for example. You can map the demand using this satellite. You can also map military radios, those of adversaries. So it has an intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance value, this mapping and tapping. It's called signals intelligence. Then you have multistatic radar. You can use distributed phased arrays to listen and to emit radio frequency energy, to do radar, to do sensing. And so we have this fusion of networks terrestrially for communications. We'll see the fusion of networks for military purposes. It's not just the military space building a space component that's siloed. That they're building a space component that's fully integrated with the terrestrial components, and it has the same aspects to it. What makes a non-terrestrial network fit to integrate and fuse with a terrestrial network for commercial communications are the same aspects makes it fit to fuse and integrate with networks that are on land, sea and air, existing systems of the military. And the military already has radar systems, and they can operate in silent mode and just pick up signals if something else generates the energy that pings the target. You can use space-based phased arrays in that manner, as well as you can emit energy from one satellite and pick it up on another. So a fusion of networks also here that augments existing systems, and AST system being protocol agnostic. It's not just that it can do either 2G, 3G, 4G, 5G, depending on what mode the single RAN Nokia base station is in. It can also do a whole set of military communications protocols, and plausibly also radar. On land, that can be foliage penetrating radar that sees through foliage, maps terrain. You can store that and overlay AI and understand changes. There's also radar that sees airplanes, missiles, slow-moving drones, fast-moving hypersonics. And you can use space-based radar for that also. It's part of the Golden Dome project. Wide field of view radar satellites. And also US capital ships use radar. We know that under Fairwind's contract, AST is doing MUOS augmentation. MUOS is a multi-billion US satellite system legacy that gives voice and communications in a much like cellular phone but over satellite. Plausibly also link 22, which is a data link using the same frequency band as MUOS. They're under MUOS contract, so why not link 22? Also, it's a long-range data link, similar to link 16. We also know that BlueWalker 3 was at the DMSP frequency, which is radio occultation for weather. The Defense Meteorological Satellite Program is a long-running US military meteorological constellation that provided global all-weather environmental data since the early 1970s and has been launching in many tiers. And again, BlueWalker 3 is emitting on the 400 megahertz frequency of that system, and you might wonder why. Then there's a power aperture. If you combine the size with the available power, there's no comparable platform in LEO. And so hosted payloads, it is big powerful platform if you want to do sensor fusion, if you want to do battle management system processing, then that's the biggest, most powerful platform in LEO to base that on. And the most simple way to fuse sensors is to deploy them on the same satellite. That reduces complexity a lot. And plausibly there's room for hosted payloads beyond the phased array mission. So I've been speaking for quite some time for this primer on AST, but I think I covered most technical aspects now.
Well, CatSe, really thank you for covering this. Learned so much more on the technical side of this company, and now kind of really have a deeper understanding of this, kind of sitting down and talking with you about this. I think a lot of us kind of understand the roadmap of the business, kind of the goals and all these aspects, but understanding further exactly how these satellites work is very helpful and interesting, and frankly, it's made me more bullish. Because you can kind of understand now, like in your brain, kind of what's happening behind the scenes and kind of how this compares to our competitors. So once again, me and SpaceMob appreciate your work and contributions to this. Thank you for coming on this podcast, and let's stay in touch.
Again, thank you for hosting me, and thank you for doing this podcast. Thank you.